Greetings, loved ones. Today we're going to talk about what victim blaming sounds like and the 5 responses that we need to make to stop perpetuating it. Help us get these messages out. Subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button, the notification bell, and please share these messages with others because you never know. Just by doing so, you could save a life. Now more than ever, we could argue that our default mode when hearing the news is to be skeptical. Thanks to the internet, anyone with Wi-Fi has a platform to be published. So often, the race to break a story first trumps accuracy, and readers are left to do the fact-checking on their own. Which is why, when survivors make the brave decision to come forward with stories of surviving abuse, they're not always met with an overwhelming chorus of support. That's too crazy to be true. He'd never do that. He doesn't seem like the type. She just wants her 15 minutes of fame. Whether we tweet it, type it, or merely think it, these types of statements are a form of victim blaming, also called victim shaming, and they're destructive. They re-traumatize and degrade survivors. They convince other survivors to stay silent, which in turn allows their perpetrators to get away without consequence. They also give abusers more ammunition to use against the new victim. See, no one believed her and no one will believe you. If you think this isn't you, examine some of these victim-blaming statements and see if any have ever popped into your mind when you hear about domestic violence. But isn't he her boyfriend? A friend discloses that she went out on a date with her boyfriend. They'd been seeing each other for a while, and perhaps they'd even been intimate. But this time, she says, was different. He was pushy, aggressive, mean. He forced her to do sexual acts she wasn't comfortable with, and he didn't listen to her protests and would not stop. Afterward, he pretended like nothing happened. She says she wants to go to the police. She thinks she may have been raped. But isn't he your boyfriend? Maybe you say, or maybe you just think it. After all, this stuff happens, right? Maybe it's even happened to you. After all, most of us are so desensitized to sexual aggressiveness in our society and pulp culture that the thought of this being assault seems like a jump. That's partly why the #MeToo movement took off with such fervor. For the first time, women collectively decided that sexual harassment and assault were no longer going to be the status quo. Facts. Sexual activity carried out with force and without the consent of the other person is rape. And an overwhelming majority of rapes that occur, 8 out of 10 rapes to be exact, are committed by someone the victim knows. Okay, let's try another question. But isn't he your husband? So let's replay the same scenario as above, but replace boyfriend with husband. Can your spouse be your rapist? Aren't you sort of obligated to have sex with the person you're married to? Facts. Marital rape by one spouse, is a crime in all 50 states, even though it took until 1993 to become so, and North Carolina was the final state to say it wasn't allowed anymore. On that note, reproductive coercion or forcing one's wife to become pregnant is also a form of domestic violence. All right, so let's try another question or thought. Well, you know, it's not like he hit you. A friend discloses she isn't allowed to work because her husband wants her to stay home with the kids. He gives her an allowance instead and makes her save her receipts from every purchase she makes her account for every penny. She says he barely gives her enough to buy food for herself and the children, and he's always going out with friends, spending wild amounts of money. She suspects he's opening credit cards all the time, and, you know, you don't think this sounds ideal, but it certainly isn't abuse after all. She's not in danger, is she? Fact. Financial abuse. When an abuser controls a survivor's economic resources, rendering them completely dependent on the abuser, or when the abuser purposefully destroys a survivor's credit, usually by opening credit cards in her name and running up the bills, it's a type of non-physical abuse that can wreak havoc in someone's life. It often comes with psychological abuse tactics like intimidation, threats, and insults, which is another form of devastating abuse. Domestic violence does not have to leave a bruise or a black eye to be abuse, and most times non-physical abuse eventually escalates to physical abuse. So here's another comment people usually say. Well, why didn't you just fight back? I would have. You know, people who haven't experienced abuse say something like this. If a partner ever slapped me, I'd slap him back twice as hard. You know, we think we'd fight back when we're being abused because, of course, we'd fight back if a stranger attacked us on the street. But a survivor who doesn't fight back can be scrutinized for this. You know, like, why did they let this happen? Facts. There is a psychological component to intimate partner abuse that's hard to understand unless you are in it. If a stranger attacks you, of course your instinct is to fight back. If a person you love and trust hits you, the reaction can be quite different. Often survivors report being in shock. They don't really want to believe what just happened, and they can't imagine hurting the person they love in return. On the flip side, partners who do try to defend themselves can then be judged just as harshly, sometimes even criminalized or sent to jail. All right, so let's throw another thought out there. Doesn't he have PTSD though? Military spouses and police spouses are 2 to 3 times more likely to be abused by a partner suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder than a spouse without it. And when they report this abuse, they're often facing victim blaming. They're perceived as turning against a war hero. After all, it's not his fault if he has PTSD. Facts. It's not his fault if he has PSTD, but there is no evidence that PTSD causes domestic violence. While PTSD symptoms can exacerbate abusive tendencies, they already existed in a person. Advocates will agree that domestic violence is always a choice. Remember, if that person is only abusive toward the spouse and the abuse follows a repeated pattern, then they are choosing when and where to exert their power and control. So the thing is, we need to stop this. The bottom line is, you are supporting victim blaming if you are trying to find reasons why the survivor story can't be true because it makes you uncomfortable to believe this happened. Blaming the survivor for the abuse or assault because of something she did or didn't do or said or didn't say. Excusing the abuse because the abuser is well-liked, rich, famous, has influence, or is a family friend or a member of your family. Excusing the abuser, rapist because of alcohol or drug use or mental health issues like childhood trauma or PTSD. Creating a false equivalency between an abuser's choice to abuse and a survivor's reasonable response, aka, but she was yelling too. Do the right thing when someone discloses abuse. Listen to them, accept them, and help them. With 1 in 3 women experiencing domestic violence worldwide, the question is not if you will encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be a person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions for justice, and those who suffer violence, they need to know those who love them and those who don't even know them will reach out and step out to give them the help and the courage they need to leave before it's too late. Help us get these messages out. Subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and the notification bell, and please share these messages with others. You never know. Just by doing so, you could save a life. If you're a victim of violence, if you're suffering abuse, I want you to listen to me. You have been lied to over and over and over. But today I want you to know the truth. And the truth is, you are valued. You are loved. You are intelligent. And you are beautiful. God does not want you to suffer violence. He wants you to live free from violence in peace and tranquility. I want you to know there is a way out. It's not your fault. Abuse is not love. If you're a victim of violence, please reach out to someone and get the help you need. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, call 911 and the help will come to you. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about a narcissistic abuser and how they will never change. Until then, God bless you.